Okay, Debbie, I'm going to pass it on to you. Maybe do a little quick introduction more about what you're doing and what your heart in some of this beautiful national school food stuff is about. No, this will do an intro.
Great. So I'm Debbie Field, and I'm the coordinator of the Coalition for Healthy School Food, and we are 316 members and 140 endorsers, including cities and schools and all kinds of health units in every province and territory. And we have 8 members in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I'll be talking more about them later. And I come to school food first as a child. I participated in a subsidized lunch program when I was growing up in New York City. And then as a parent activist, organizing a lunch program, and then for many years at Food Share, developing some of Canada's most innovative school food programs. So I've had a lot of school by school, principal by principal organizing of a variety of kinds of school food programs.
Amazing. Thank you. Jessie.
Hi everyone, Veenstra. I'm with Cafeteria Canada. We are a Canada-wide partnership-based organization that works to build capacity in schools to transform how food is experienced, learned, and celebrated in all schools across the country. And so we do that through what we refer to as a farm to school or a local food to school approach, which really has these kind of 3 key pillars or pieces of a puzzle that we've seen themes that have come up a lot throughout today's conversations. So the first is, of course, well, I should say it's really to create a comprehensive approach to school food. And so the first is healthy food in schools, why we're all here today. But also that food ideally is as locally sourced as possible, and really importantly also culturally appropriate and reflects the local context of the school community. The second is opportunities for hands-on learning. So we've heard a lot about the food literacy piece, and we have seen through our programs that goes hand in hand with successful school meal programs. And then the last piece of the puzzle that's really critical is the community partners. So this can be farmers, other local food providers, it's our dietitians, it's your corner stores, it's anybody that can play a role within your school food system that we know are essential to making these programs not just successful, but really thrive within the community. So the work that we do, we basically work to grow, connect, fund programs, which I'll speak a little bit more to in the next question, and to inform policy by evaluating and working with good folks like the Coalition.
Wonderful, thank you. Sue-Ann, you're up.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sue-Ann Banks, and I'm coordinator and host of the Indigenous School Food Circle, which is co-hosted by Cafeteria Canada, the Coalition for Healthy School Food, and Canadian Feed the Children. I've also been the Indigenous lead in BC for the past couple of years at the BC chapter of the Coalition for Healthy School Food, and I have been learning and connecting with Indigenous communities in BC and around Canada, and learning the landscape of what Indigenous school food is, and that's in community, that's in public schools, and really trying to understand what barriers are being faced, what that looks like in the context of all the different school systems, the food systems, how to connect that farm to table, the local community, integration of everything. It's been very complex. What funding looks like for Indigenous school food communities, and that's First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities in the whole of how complex every diverse community is. It's very different from the public school system, but then there's also a very large population of Indigenous students that are in public schools, so there's just lots of interesting things to learn and bring to the table to make sure that we do have culturally appropriate and traditional foods in schools. And, yeah, so thanks.
Everybody, tell us that.
So I am an academic, but before going into academia, I was actually inspired to work in school food because I was working in Ontario with a local program that was starting up one of the first farm to school programs in the province. And the conundrum there is that even though we were in like the greenhouse capital of the province, kids were the least likely to eat fruits and vegetables, even though they're right in their backyard. So I was really keen to help start that program and importantly, document the economic impacts and understand about food supply chains and how we could get those fruits and vegetables into schools. So that was really the start of my academic journey and foray into school food programs. And since that time, I guess 2015 when I first started, I really got linked up with the coalition and Debbie, and I've really been an applied academic researcher looking to make impact with policymakers. A lot of my work is driven through the lens of how can this be translated to both programs on the ground, and utilizing the lessons that I'm gathering from across the country, and also to policymakers. So Joshna did mention one of their reports that you can find called the Economic Rationale for Investing in School Meal Programs for Canada. And I was told that it plays a really important part in getting it funded at the national level. So there are 10 key major impacts I'll go into partly today on the panel about, but I think would be really interesting to talk about in news circles. Another area and kind of resource that I'm really passionate about is studying different school food program models across the country. So there's a new report released at the back at the Arrow Food Institute's table that documents 15 promising case studies across the country. And it was a large collaborative effort, this piece, to document at least one program in every province and territory. And one of the programs, School Lunch Association, that case study was led by Dr. Emily Doyle, who's in the room today. And really great examples of different models at different scales and what's available, what are really the assets in the backyard. And it's the hope that our team has developed this really series of case studies that you can see either your school district or your school board or your small school or whatever scale you're at in these other program models that can be a resource to learn and get inspiration from different ways of operating. And just the last thing to close that I do is I've been leading a survey of school meal programs in Canada called the Canadian School Food Program Survey since 2018-19. And this is really an effort to capture important baseline data about school meal programs across the country. So I've been liaising with each province and territory, particularly the leads in the government, to capture that data. And I'm doing another round of this survey right now. And others in the room, like Hattie, that have had to meet in person finally after so many years of collaborating together. It's been really wonderful. And I just think this is such a momentous moment right now that we all have together. To reflect on where we have been and where we want to go. So I'm really looking forward to sharing with you today some of those insights and hopefully inspirations, I think beyond the bounds of what we have right now, to dream really big about school food and about food in general in our communities.
Ooh, wonderful, thank you. As you can see, we have collected a no jokes lineup of panelists here talking this all through. Originally in my notes, I had Jesse to speak first, but I'm going to switch that around a bit, and we're going to do the first detailed question with you, Debbie. And really, I've known you for 20 years now, and this has been the thing that you have been saying all this time. And so first, I really hope that when this announcement came, you took a moment to stand in the sunshine. And we all have this amazing opportunity to actually do a thing that we've been yelling and screaming for all this time. So walk us through a little bit about why this was such a victory, talk about the national announcement, and then some of the things that how the coalition sort of participating in this.
Well, it's a real pleasure. I think it really was a grassroots success story, and that bodes very well for your conversations today about the process you're going to go through in Newfoundland and Labrador, school by school. So we actually did this riding by riding, politician by politician, school food program by school food program, or we would not have got it. MP Julie DeRusin often told us that the Prime Minister told her 8 years ago that he would never say the words National School Food Program. And he actually didn't say the words National School Food Program until November 2023. So what this is really about is our power and your power, and of course you in this room played a really important part in it all along with Liberal MPs who we visited and talked to. So it was a process we started 10 years ago. And in that room, interestingly enough, was Carolyn Webb and Selena Starler and myself. So there were 3 of us who are here today, had a vision that we could get a national school food program, and many of us have been working on it for decades before. And we started the Coalition for Healthy School Food in November 2014. So it's kind of interesting. So again, we talked about that this morning a lot of times, how long things take. So 10 years to go from nothing, well, there have been a couple of conversations to getting it achieved. So, Ashley did a fabulous job of going through what the next steps are. But what it was the Liberal government acting on a commitment that they had made in the pre-election period. So that's the promise that we always talk about. They never promised it as a government, they promised it as the Liberal Party, that if elected, they would invest $1 billion over 5 years. The NDP said if elected, they would invest $1 billion over 4 years. And then there were mandate letters, so that was crucial. So, every couple of years we'd get a little victory. So we'd have mandate letters, and it was going to happen. The 2 ministers was going to do something, but then budget 2022 and budget 2023, no money. And if you'd asked us in the summer of 2023, Carolyn always believed it was going to happen, but at that time I thought, no, this government has run out of steam, run out of energy, run out of ideas, run out of wanting to start basically a national school food program. And then 10 things happened, and I'll go really quickly through them because they're very important to the next steps. The affordability crisis, that was the first thing that happened. An affordability crisis, not even so much for the parents, but for the program providers. What was it like for Selena and your team to buy food, or John and your team to buy food? And so we were able to really draw attention to that. And Ontario programs actually started to close. So that became the first step. Quickly then after that, there were these amazing provincial and territorial announcements of which 4 major ones. So it was BC, PI made a small one before, but then BC in rapid order, then it was Manitoba and yourselves. And being able to say to the federal government, you're not starting a new national program, but you're matching the provincial and territorial investments. And so Sarah Keyes, the Ontario chapter lead, did this amazing thing where we calculated. So we can tell you that $288 million a year comes in from the provinces and territories and cities. So when the feds are coming in with $200 million, they're not even matching the current need that is there. Public opinion was hugely in our favor, always has been. Years ago we even did this, but 84% support of Canadians for National School Food Program in a poll that Breakfast Club of Canada commissioned. The NDP finally decided they would make it a deal breaker issue with the Liberals. They made it their top demand in budget 2024. That took us years of working in a grassroots way, going to get NDP MPs, mostly in BC, to see programs and to convince them to convince their party leader. In all the cases, it was Liberal backbenchers and NDP backbenchers who were pushing this. People who knew the programs in the local community. Again, not a top-down program, not a big public relations firm in Ottawa, doing campaigns and bus shelters, but grassroots campaign. Then Serge Cormier, a backbencher in New Brunswick, a Liberal, he put in a bill a long time ago, years ago, to create a framework for a national school food policy. It came to second reading in November. The NDP, the Bloc, for the first time, the Bloc from Quebec, who had always opposed a federal program, thinks it's only a provincial or Quebec matter. The Bloc voted for Serge Cormier's bill, as did the Greens and the NDP and the Liberals. Conservatives all voted against it as a group. And the Liberals and NDP started tweeting, how mean-spirited the Conservatives were, and then that's when Trudeau said, I'm not like Pierre Poilievre, I care about Canadians, I'm going to do a national school food program. And then he said it, and that was a really big moment. Amberley's report was crucial. It got the attention of the Minister of Finance on the return on investment. We're convinced that Amberley's report, the support of the Arrell family and the Arrell Institute, was actually a crucial moment. A teacher from Vancouver named Brent Mansfield, who has one of the best school food programs in which kids, grade 6 kids, cook the food in the school, decided to run around the school 200 times, then he went to Ottawa and ran around Parliament 200 times, got the attention of the Prime Minister. We then were able to figure out that the Prime Minister identified as a teacher. And then the Canadian Teachers Federation, which is an endorser of the coalition, made it their number one priority with the federal government in budget 2024. We haven't talked enough today yet about teachers, and we're getting much more involved with the teachers unions here in Newfoundland and Labrador. I see our friend from Manitoba nodding. It was the Teachers Society of Manitoba, the first teachers union in the country, called for Universal School Food Program. Cody Ploy, a backbencher, he's actually the maritime lead for the Liberal caucus, decided to invite us, and Carolyn went and did a press conference at Parliament, which allowed the backbencher support to come. And finally, the Great Big Crunch allowed us to get the kind of notoriety we had, again, a lot of people participating all across the country. So all of this led to a tipping point. Again, you know this from what happened here in Newfoundland and Labrador. You do stuff, and then boom, it kind of happens. So what we're waiting for, and again, Ashley said this morning, we're waiting for the BIA, which is the Budget Implementation Act, to be passed. And Carolyn will make a deputation in Ottawa on Monday. A member from BC is making one right now, trying to convince the Finance Committee to accept the whole budget and to accept this little clause which will allow them to sign the agreements with the provinces without going back to Parliament, which would slow it all down. And then the national food policy, the national school food policy should be out. Then Minister Sutts, who did that great announcement, welcome to us this morning, will be able potentially to negotiate an agreement with your Premier to receive Newfoundland and Labrador's share of only 79 million, because that's all they're going to distribute this year. So I'll talk about this later, but one of our problems is, of course, this is not enough money, as you've heard from Joshna and others. So what's very exciting is this partnership between community and all of the allies, very much of what you've talked about in terms of getting us to this moment.
Wonderful. It's a no-joke story, right? It's really quite an epic tale. Thank you for this. Jesse, I'm going to go over to you to tell us a bit about what Cafeteria Canada is seeing in terms of the shift in energy in the school communities that you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of this kind of happening at the federal and provincial and territorial levels, policy-wise, with our organization, the work that we do, what we're seeing, first of all, I would say is a real increase in energy. There's a huge buzz around school food and the possibilities. I think through COVID was really, really tough times for everybody, obviously, but a lot of burnout, especially for teachers and folks working in school food. So many logistical hurdles, so little time to do all of that value add with respect to food literacy, and all of those things that really help to bring these programs to life. And so we're seeing that come back, which is really exciting. And one of the ways that we help to foster and facilitate that is through our grants program. So what do we do? We essentially facilitate demonstration projects and kind of work at a community-based level to see what different kind of models work, how do they work, and to be able to bring folks together and to share knowledge and to really work on this from a community level, and whether that's sharing within a given community or region or across the country. So we facilitate our grants. Those are really, really important, especially continuing to move forward, because as we've heard, there's a lot of infrastructure need. So by and large, the biggest things that we see our grant spent on in schools is equipment, either for the food service component and also really importantly, the food literacy. So lots of school gardens, huge surge in increase in indoor growing in the last couple of years especially. But those are flexible grants to help schools work towards transforming their own individual school food system. And then other core work that we're facilitating to basically provide some wraparound supports for those programs and all school food programs across Canada. So we have a new 4-year initiative called Nourishing Indigenous Food and Foodways in Schools, and that has kind of multiple sub-projects, but is all about at its core facilitating access to Indigenous foods and foodways, so really importantly bringing land-based learning and community connection into both Indigenous schools, but as Suran mentioned, public schools that serve Indigenous students as well, and I'll let her share a little bit more about that. On the local procurement side, this is something that I'll speak more to a little bit later, but that is a big goal for us. So we are trying, it's also been one of the biggest nuts to crack. In theory, there's so much potential to connect schools to farmers as well as hunters and fishers and other folks that provide food in the food system. But really figuring out those challenges with respect to distribution, procurement, what are the policy barriers like HACCP, all of those hurdles for schools. That's a really important priority for us moving forward, as well as food literacy. We've heard a lot about food literacy, and as Debbie mentioned, we haven't heard enough about teachers and the role that they play. And we heard it on this morning's panel that I think food literacy is really important, and so we need to engage teachers and have them be champions of this work with their buy-in. It will help to make the program successful. But the reality is a lot of teachers don't know where to start with this. They need the capacity building supports of how to make curriculum connections to food. And learning possibilities through food are endless. You can teach anything through food, and there's so many great examples like Brent and other teachers in this room, as well as across the country. So it's really about helping to create a pipeline and also some resources to bring more teachers into that fold. So we're doing some work right now with Alicia Martin, who's a PhD student at the University of Guelph, to develop a food systems literacy framework that lays out competencies for educators on teaching food systems literacy. And a little more work on that, but I'll cap it there because I know we've got more folks to get to. And the last piece with all this is evaluation. So evaluation is a really important part of our work in terms of measuring and keeping track of what's working, what's not, adapting as we go, and sharing that data so that we can help make more policy change.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have some understanding of exactly who key players are, what the history is. Let's dive into the hopes and dreams angle on this conversation. So the question is, what are you most excited about and most concerned about, with the recent announcement of $1 billion over 5 years to start a national school food program? We're going to go Debbie, Jesse, Amberley on this lineup, so you can anticipate your answers. Debbie. So listen, Sue-Ann, I feel like we need to hear a bit more from you. So how about you go? And what you're excited about, or most concerned about? Give us the truth.
We were kind of really enjoying the momentum in BC for school food because they did announce $214 million over 3 years in BC. So it was kind of a momentous moment for us in 2023. That's the Feeding Futures funding, and we have a BC tripartite education agreement, which also enhances funding to go into First Nation community schools. So we were coming up with all sorts of fun things in BC and just seeing things happening on the ground. I'm a part of the advisory committee for one of the local school districts and part of the community food hub as well. And just getting to see all of these connections happening and the support coming from the different funding structures. And then when we got the announcement federally, even more momentum happening. There's a lot of interest in what Indigenous school food looks like in public schools and how we can all work together and enhancing those food stories and just really connecting the community. And it's been amazing. Like it's been nonstop actually. I think since April when that announcement came out, we've been just building on what it looks like, funding in all the provinces and territories for Indigenous school food. And we do have it is complex, so that's also part of the concern. What does this look like for all of these First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities around Canada? And how's it going to reach? How's this funding going to streamline? We've got a lot of remote and rural communities. We've experienced that here in this area, and just trying to be innovative in the way that move forward with school food programming and building those connections. And I know in some cases it can be really uncomfortable conversations, and just realizing, sometimes we need to experience that discomfort to move forward and really change the way and the pathways for our food systems in schools. So yeah, those are the things that I'm really excited about with this, and also a little concerned, so.
Yes, amazing, and rightly so, thank you. Amberley, let's hear from you. Tell us about what you're excited about / most concerned
Well, there's so many things I'm excited about, but to pick one, on the day of the budget announcement, when I was going to lock up with Carolyn and Debbie, I was so thrilled to see the announcement of the special, the continuation of the Local Food Infrastructure Fund, and noting a specialized stream for school food, because when the Food Policy for Canada was first released in 2019, as soon as I saw the Local Food Infrastructure Fund, I thought to myself, there needs to be a school food stream. And we're talking to Debbie and saying, we have to put this forward, and I was writing about it in all my op-eds that I often do. So when I read those words in the budget, I was so thrilled. I know it's not as much money as we hoped it was going to be, and I know there's many school food members that have received money from this particular grant in the past, and there's been feedback that it's been too onerous in terms of paperwork. Unfortunately, no news when it comes to government programs, but I do hope that feedback was given to make it less onerous and easier to really transform food systems through school food programs, because I'll share this, I guess I can share the story now, but I've just seen firsthand so many school food programs when they've really taken ownership of their school food supply chain. And what I mean by that is, a whole school board having a vision behind actually realizing that they can go out and get the food, that their local transportation department actually will support them and saying, wow, use the truck that we have, or we can make another truck and pay your fuel, and you could actually go out to the farm and gather that food. And the story I want to tell is of an Indigenous school food program in central Alberta, the Masquatchis, which is 4 different First Nations that came together and had a big vision for school food, where they realized that it had a few, half-functioning cafeterias and, disparity between the school food programs, and they decided, what if we came together as 4 nations and instead came under one new school district, one new school board, and we had a big vision about school food. And they had a huge vision, and they have been achieving that by buying what used to be an old grocery store and making it into a food hub, which is essentially just a great storage facility for food. When they go out and buy that full orchard of apples from British Columbia that's just across the border, they can bring it back and have the whole year of apples supplied. And they're getting it at about half the rate as if they would have gone to their previous partner. They were previously partnering with Cisco or Gordon Food Services. And they said, that was working as a trial period. When they realized they could save about half the cost by getting it themselves and getting local food, it was like a win-win and no-brainer. And they were employing people in the community. I could go on and on about benefits in terms of this type of model, but I just think things like these particular funds and putting money mindfully into school food infrastructure will pay dividends for generations to come. School food programs, investment in school food programs is also investment into community food security. So when I see the work that Food First is doing, and when I learned about the regional animators and leads, I kept thinking, I really hope the government earmarks money towards a Newfoundland, towards building out these hubs, build on what's working. I'm just really passionate about food supply chains and thinking about the flow of food. And again, it was existing trucks that were already at the school board. So talk to, schools NL and then see what kind of trucks they have, I would say. Maybe the libraries that already have to deliver books up into Labrador might be sending trucks, and you could put some food on that truck. I had fascinating conversations about some of these different ideas that piggybacking off resources and the benefits that comes from that when you actually then have community food security being built, because you have control over that food versus waiting on the next order. So I do digress. My concern, however, to answer the second part of the question, is that as a researcher, the timeline has been really tight on this announcement, and we just need to make sure that we have the right tools in place to evaluate these impacts, because if we don't do this with the change of government, it's really vulnerable to funding cuts. So I really hope that there's some great thoughts about doing some great benchmarking on school food so that we can have this into the future.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, we obviously the time is shrinking, and we have more to get through than is this. But I think I want to push forward to the third question, which is what isn't getting enough attention, and what do we need to get there? How do we need to focus? Jessie, can you start us off there on that conversation, and then we'll go Sue-Ann, Amberley, Debbie.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to pick up on what Amberley said. I think for myself, the local food piece is really, really important because this is something that has been part of our mandate for 10 plus years and that we still are kind of struggling to figure out. And I think school food systems are unique in and of themselves. And so I think it's also interesting that the school food program is part of the National School Food Policy. It's in the Federal Agriculture Minister's mandate. But for me personally, I feel like agriculture has been a little silent on the national scale in terms of the role that they might play in this and how much, aside from the local food and infrastructure funding, I would like to see more presence of agriculture at the table to really figure out this local food systems piece. Because there's so much potential, as Amberley said, beyond just within the schools, but to really transform our broader food systems. And this is a bigger issue, which you alluded to, Joshna, that about creating resilient and regenerative food systems that have impacts for the environment. Like there's the Coalition Food Secure Canada has done great work to demonstrate how school food programs support the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that by tackling that local food piece, we really can drive that forward. And so I think it's a real missed opportunity if we don't bring that in at the outset. And the other piece that I think is not getting enough attention, although we've heard it lots in the room today, which is great, is the food literacy piece. I do think it needs to be embedded from the get-go, because in terms of the vulnerability to potential cuts, if we don't make that connection for students, we don't give them ownership, allow them to champion, participate in not just the school meal programs, but understanding where their food comes from and their overall place within the food system, then again, it's just a huge missed opportunity, not just within schools, but for broader social systems change, really.
Wonderful, thank you. Sue-Ann, what isn't getting enough attention?
For what I've seen, I think it's a lot of the connections to the local food stories in how that works. I see there's a lot of talk of wanting to put culturally appropriate traditional foods in schools, and just really identifying that we all come from a different story, especially if we're talking Indigenous foodways as well. Connected to the stories of the land. There's been a lot of colonial harm that's happened through food, and so that might be also why there might be a disconnection to that foodway in our communities and regions. And I think bringing that to the table in school food programs is just something that we can reflect on and learn from and bring together in that interconnected way is really important in bringing those values into school food programming. And it really enhances that adaptability to bring forth those Indigenous foodways and culturally appropriate foods. And I think another piece as well that I think is kind of, I think just going off what Jessie said, with that like local procurement. In BC we have Feed BC, which has a goal of 30% local procurement within the school systems, but there's really a disconnection of like, how do the schools connect to those local folks? And there's a lot of people doing things off the side of their desk, so it doesn't make it easy to just go out and make these connections. So yeah, it's really important as well to also further enhance Indigenous farmers and agriculture in any way that we can, because they do make up only about 0.05% overall in Canada, and any way we can do that in these other initiatives is really important. But other than that, that's on
Thank you, Amberley. We're rolling over to you. And I know this means you and I had this conversation there about pulling more local food in. But anchoring in your report, I I'm not going to put words in your mouth about wasn't getting enough attention, but I hope and think you're going to tell us a little bit about returns on investments and how the money can work with this and what we're not thinking about perhaps.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief so I give you a chance to speak. But just to plug this report again, there's 10 key themes of which the usual suspects are there in terms of education outcomes and health outcomes. But the ones that really took Minister Freeland's office with interest was really around the support to mothers. That there's longitudinal research from Sweden that found that access to school meal programs increased mothers' participation in the workplace by 5%. It also found that families who had access to school meal programs had a permanent increase of income of 2.6%. So that makes a big difference when it comes to buying food or other things that you need. And then lastly, the last piece I'll note is that students that had access to a school meal program over the 9-year intervention period of which the study was done, found that students who had access actually in the long term, like lifetime earnings, went on to earn 3% more as an adult because of increase of health benefits and educational outcomes. And those in the lowest income brackets actually earned 6% more in terms of lifetime earnings. So I think we have a really momentous opportunity here in Newfoundland to, do a similar longitudinal research study to really make the economic case across, liberal, conservative, etc. That's good news stories for any whatever political background you come from.
Wonderful, thank you for that. Debbie, round us up. What are we not paying attention to?
I think we're not paying enough attention to what Joshna talked about as the win-win of all this. So this morning there was a lot of things that felt like we were loading on shoulds rather than seeing the gifts of what we were talking about in relationship to children's engagement. So food literacy is not a should. It's actually true, and we've heard this a couple times this morning, that kids who are invited first to choose the food and then potentially to cook and prepare it and serve it will eat more of it. So it's not like we have to go, it's almost like this morning that we were feeling like, oh my God, here's something else we've got to do. We got to do food literacy, we got to do local procurement, we got to involve the kids, we got to involve the parents, we got to involve the teachers, oh my goodness. But it's not like that. And the reason we're so born again, those of us who work in this, and everybody here understands that, but people out there don't. And that was, I think actually that was more the question to you from our colleague from, the way I heard your question from Winnipeg was, it's not so much even explaining why we have to spend more on the food, but why it matters at all. And we had our questions and we didn't have time for them, but what I was happy about in the budget is we set a new course literally for every human being who lives in the physical space that is Canada. 30, 40, 50 years from now, we'll look back and say, this was one of the transformative moments of our future. What is the Canadian cuisine? Can we build the best food program in the world that is community-based and not top-down? There's not a single other program in the world that has the potential that we have to be community-based. Because every other program came from a top-down law, which had benefits, but had huge disadvantages. So what we're talking about is school by school, literally kid by kid. And so we're going to want to engage people, not because we should do it, but because it will not work if we don't. So food literacy is not a should. It is the only way to make this work. Kids have to be in the driver's seat. And right now they're not. Right now who's in the driver's seat is the fast food corporations.
Amen.
And the marketers. Which is why if there's any mistrust of the private sector, it's that. It's not that there's not great human beings and great innovation and tons of great individual solutions. But the thing that's killing our children, and we know this as parents and educators and everybody in the room, is the fast food system. So how can we create a new culture if we don't create a new culture? And that's going to have to be a different bottom up than what we have now.
Thank you. All right. So that is, we've hit cap on panel time. but now we're gonna roll into getting all of you involved here. So we're the lovely folks with the flag microphones. Any questions, comments, encouragements, big ideas? Now is the time.
I just want to know if you're hiring.
No, that is the one missing piece here, is the sign-up sheet, right? That's the thing that we're definitely is being missed, for sure. For sure. Please, yes.
I don't know if I need, yeah, let's see. Yeah. Amazing panel, so thank you to all of you. I guess I have a question, and I'm not really sure who'd like to answer it, but I was thinking about you, Debbie, but you know, I love what you just said, like what really matters, right? You said child by child, community by community. You've heard our story today in Newfoundland and Labrador, and a lot of us at the panel where you are. Any sense or direction or words of wisdom in moving forward, not just as a school food provider, but to our government and to the people around the room, ensuring that we move forward in the right way?
I mean, mine's pretty simple, and I would just say, start small. And what that looks like is gonna look different in every school. It might be, we were chatting at the rural table this morning that maybe it's not necessary to have 5 days and move to lunch 5 days a week. Even 1 or 2 days would be a huge help. And like small, achievable steps and moving incrementally. I think all of this, as Debbie's alluded to, is a culture shift, and that is not gonna happen over time or overnight. It will happen over time. And we've seen it in so many schools where, the culture is completely transformed and kids are running down the hall and excited to run to their salad bar or, out into the garden and they're picking and eating things right away. And that doesn't happen really quickly, but it is possible. And so I think don't try to do too much at once or too quickly. I think slow and steady is going to be the biggest potential to have sustainable change over time.
I just want to say really, really quickly, I was facilitating the table of high school and early childhood education and early learning and childcare. And what's amazing is right now in Newfoundland and Labrador, children who go to childcare get a meal and 2 snacks a day, funded and regulated. There were people at our table who were talking about that, and how can we take what is happening with those little kids whose taste buds are being shifted, and they're being provided tastings. You can go into high schools and provide tastings. Somebody at our table suggested never send home the menu until kids have tasted the menu, so they know what it tastes like and smells like. So again, and then there will not be one solution for high schools in Newfoundland and Labrador. In one school, we're going to have a great teacher who's going to go to her principal and say, I'm happy to work with all the kids in this school to make food for the school. In another school, it's going to be some parent volunteers who might be coming in even 1 day a week to cook. In another school, it will be working with Chartwell or a private provider to work with students. We heard from Chartwells that in many provinces, Chartwells will provide the food, but the students will cook it through the culinary arts program. So you're going to have tons of options and tons of solutions. And you also have academic partners. I want to say that again, Memorials is here, so you're going to be able to get some of this baseline data. You're going to be able to go into a high school right now, talk to kids about what they're eating, how many servings of vegetable and fruits are they eating today, how many will they be eating 2 years from now, are their grades any better? You're going to be able to get this data that's going to change the future of the program in the province.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Microphone is coming.
Wonderful panel, thank you so much.
Yes.
So much information. One of the things I'm wondering about is building sustainable programs, and I do mean sustainable in the way that I think we all think that I mean sustainable, but I also mean sustainable in terms of making more and needing less over time. I talk with administrators, with program providers, and the amount of time that they spend on applications for grants is staggering, and it takes away from the time that they're buying food, preparing food, working hands-on with students, working hands-on with families and in our parent groups. And so one of the things I'm really trying to think about when we're looking at putting systems into schools is what will allow them to maybe make their food or make food that goes further so that they need less funding over time and that they have more ownership over it. And also involving our community in a way that they become real stakeholders and they have ownership over these programs. So when funding is, sorry to be a pessimist, but potentially inevitably cut, that program doesn't disappear. And that's a big fear for me because I've seen programs that are amazing just disappear overnight because people aren't getting paid, because we can't buy materials. So other ideas for kind of building sustainable programs that can run even with less external funding coming in.
This is such an interesting question because I know this personal experience. All of the we get funding for the grant, you know what I mean, to pay me to be there for 12 months or 9 months, and then that funding runs out and the programs all fall flat, right? And I think all of us are dreaming and hoping that this move would not be vulnerable to that, but I think it still is, right? I think these vulnerabilities will exist because we only have commitment for 5 years. Any thoughts on more? I mean, other than shaking the money tree on what else can we do?
I'll go. So 2 things, I'd be brief. The first is I think there's a huge opportunity to map out food system sustainability. So to think beyond just the school food program and to think about how it also links up with getting food into the community. So other rural communities, we all talked about the challenges in Labrador, right? So how can it not only piggyback off of getting food to the school, but maybe to other programs or to other services to service more healthy food in grocery stores or whatever the service is there. So I would really encourage the government folks here to think strategically about mapping where there are a cluster of schools and to think about how they could be shared kitchens. It was the 19% of schools that had a commercial kitchen, I remember from this morning. Map where those are. Are there neighboring elementary schools that could link up with those schools? Really important, I think, to make sure that money in that first year is sent out and mapped out well into infrastructure, because that will be assets for 30, 40, 50 years to come. Don't miss this opportunity, please. The second thing is to link into perhaps what are they called? RAP programs, the Registered Apprenticeship programs. There's amazing programs in Alberta that are linked up where they have journeyman cooks and bakers that are now have students in high school who are working under them to get their credits, and then they also have sustainable source of funding because it's an economic development program within the government. So get students trained and also to have great opportunities to prepare meals in schools. Thanks.
Jump in with 1 minute. There's another coalition called the School Meal Coalition, and it was started, it's a global coalition. And it has said that by the year 2030, every child, every day, meal at school. So where we're going, and that was the other thing, my question about what I was excited about in the budget, Canada's just finally joined the rest of the world. The people who are in that coalition, who are UN-based organizations, say that we have a total commitment globally to a public education system, and now we have to make a total commitment publicly to a public school food system. It's just the way it is. So it will be not cut in the same way because it is the building blocks of the next generation. And I know that sounds Pollyanna, but it's not. It's going to be what's going to be, right? We'll look back and say, Canada embarked on a journey which made it that way. Now that is going to mean reusing resources, and one of the reasons teachers are so important in this, and again, apologies to the teachers in the room, to say you have to do another thing. It reminds me, I once tried to get my doctor to say she would prescribe vegetables and fruit, and she said, oh my God, and first cigarettes, now this, oh my God, you expect us to do everything? I do expect our teachers to teach our children food literacy. They are being paid by the public system to be there, and integrating food into what they do all day long is how we're not gonna have to replace, and that's why I don't actually think pay chefs for the answer, but teachers who may be chefs and who will work with chefs, and the role for chefs in the private sector. But it's the people who are there with our kids all day. This is a skill. Kids have to know how to eat, cook, and grow food, or they shouldn't be able to graduate high school, right? This is what we mean by food literacy. So that's where the optimism is, that we are going to transform this. And it goes back to that, it's not a should, it's what's good for you. Teachers who work in a school where kids are well fed can teach, and they like going to work. And so this is their gift as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We are going to wrap this up. Please offer a nice warm round of applause. Thank you so much. Obviously, we're just getting started, but the advice and the wisdom of all of you here and your work and the evidence that you bring to this, I feel will make this as rich as possible.